Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Wednesday morning room with Tim Sullivan and me, Maya Matsuoka, as your hosts and moderators. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time on Clubhouse. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock. We have a very special speaker, and hopefully, Diane, you will take a little time to introduce yourself. But today's speaker is Diane Tincher. I was made aware of her when I started writing articles for Japonica in Medium. We connected there. I read her articles and was really impressed with the research she does, and they're all very well written and interesting and engaging. And so we reached out to Diane and asked if she would be open to being a guest speaker in our Wednesday morning room. Diane graciously accepted, and so I really look forward to hearing some of the stories that Diane can share. And again, I'll let Diane introduce herself. That said, Maya, are you ready to jump in? Did you have anything to add to my introduction here?
Yes, thank you, Tim, for jumping in. Thank you, Diane, for joining us this morning. I'm very happy to have you here, and the team just said the same thing in a different way, of course. So, I wrote on LinkedIn yesterday, but I just want to repeat here once again that I love to connect with people who think that learning or who perceive learning as a lifelong journey. And Diane is one such a person. And so thank you so very much, Diane, for saying yes to our request without any further ado. So I'll give you the floor. And, let's start.
Okay, well, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm from Northern Virginia, and I went to the Philippines to do volunteer work when I was young, and then after 10 years there and a year in Hong Kong, I came to Japan in 1987. I was never intending to come to Japan, but here I am, many years later, in Japan. But as for lifelong learning, I'm a great fan of the great courses. I don't know if you've heard of those, but it's a company that started in Northern Virginia by an ex-senator who he felt that adults should have opportunities for education, and he started hiring the best professors from universities around the world to create courses for this company, which he originally called the Teaching Company. And they're just fabulous courses. I mean, my poor kids, they listen to these courses, and they went to college in the U.S., and they're like, oh, Mom, college is not like the great courses. The teachers aren't that great. But so I highly recommend the great courses because the teachers are fabulous, and they have topics like, I went for years studying psychology and human behavior. I've done history of Europe and Greece and China and, of course, Japan. And, I can't talk that company up enough. But then I've also read a lot of books. I recently finished this biography of Mao by Jung Chang. And it's like a nightmare because Mao was just so awful. But it really changed my concept of what Mao was like, because I had learned the Western version of Mao as being a philosopher and this great leader of Chinese communism. But this woman and her husband, this Chinese woman and her English husband, did 12 years of research and interviewed people from like Henry Kissinger to the Russian ambassador, all kinds of people, Mao's secretaries and stuff, and they got a different story. But anyway, that's not Japan. So a few years ago, I got involved with leading tours in Japan, and that perked my interest in just diving deeply into Japan. And as part of that, which Maya had asked me last week, because I was late getting back to her, and I said, I was traveling. So I'd actually gone to Fukuoka because, did I tell you I live in Kagoshima? Anyway, so I had to go to Fukuoka to take these national guide tests that I've been trying to pass. Yeah. But my Japanese reading skills just aren't native level, let's just say. So I'm not going to hold my breath on those ones. I think I flunked again. But over the course of the years I've been taking them, I have passed all the tests, but not just within the 2 years that the government requires. So anyway, Let me tell you a little bit about Kagoshima, since that's where I'm from. It's If you've ever heard of Kagoshima, you probably thought about Sakurajima, because that's what Kagoshima is famous for. But Sakurajima is not the only volcano down here. In fact, southern Kyushu was formed by the eruption of 4 enormous 20-kilometer wide calderas. And they formed a plateau of pyroclastic flow that is pretty much half the land surface of southern Kyushu. And Sakurajima itself sits on the southern edge of what's called the Aira caldera. Now, this Aira volcano erupted 30,000 years ago, and it covered the area of southern Kyushu with a deep layer of white pumiceous soil that's called shirasu. And that shirasu played a pretty big role in life down here. But right now, today, under the bay in Sakurajima is the Aira caldera's lava pool. It's a big magma chamber. So under the bay, there's this lake of fire just waiting to come out. But anyway, this shirasu played a historic role in that there's a lot of cliffs around here from this shirasu. It cracks and breaks, and that's why we get a lot of landslides down here. But historically, even the Hayato people that were the ancient barbarians that lived in southern Kyushu before the Ritsuyo kind of forced them to. I mean, the Ritsuyo system was put into place in 703. It was based on the Chinese system of laws, and what they did is they reallocated land and they made everybody sign a registration. Anyway, that ended the Hayato people, but that's a different story. But these people, and even the Shimazus, they made their castles on top of these shirasu plateaus, and so they had these sheer cliff sides, and they were pretty much impregnable. Even the Hayato held out for a long time against the imperial army because of these nice castles on top of these plateaus. But anyway, the downside of this type of soil is that it's really hard to grow rice. And so the people of Kagoshima used to grow millet, water potatoes that you grow in wet paddies. It's like kind of a taro root. And they grew taro root. But anyway, that's the soil down here. And then we've got Sakurajima. And have you ever seen pictures of Sakurajima? It's kind of like a long volcano. And the reason it has this weird shape is because it's 2 volcanoes stuck together. And there's 2, what do you call those things where the smoke comes out of? 2 peak parts where there's a hole. Great vocabulary. And the southern one is the active side. So we always see smoke coming from the south of Sakurajima. But most volcanoes are this triangle shape. And so down in the south of Kagoshima, we've got this volcano called Kaimon. And if you've ever seen pictures of Kaimon, it's this beautiful triangle volcano set by itself out kind of into the sea a little bit. And it's called our Satsuma Fuji because Satsuma is the old name, and it is still the name for the peninsula I live on. Anyway, it's our Satsuma Fuji, but it wasn't always a nice triangle. Until 885, it had a flat top. But that year it erupted and a lava dome formed on top that made it that nice triangle shape. But in the course of that eruption, volcanic ash covered 120 square kilometers of southern Kyushu. And it caused a lot of trouble. If you get your farmland covered in ash, well, it's not great. So it was up to a half a meter deep. And then the ash became hard as stone. So when the farmers would hit the ash with a hoe to try to break it, it would actually spark because it had turned to stone. And so the local people called it Murasaki Kora, and that translates as purple hard stuff. And so geologists have come to study that, and they can't figure out why it got so hard. And so the correct geological term for this hard ash is Murasaki Kora, purple hard stuff. But if you come to southern Kyushu, you have to go to this museum to be able to see a sample of it. I mean, I guess if you look hard enough, you can find some, but it was a long time ago. Anyway, am I boring you with these stories? I'm just talking about geology and stuff. Well, so anyway, Sakurajima erupts every day. And so we people here in Kagoshima have to sweep up ash around our houses and, put in these little yellow bags that the city takes away. And they use the ash for reclaiming land. And every morning I check the weather, and the weather has this map that shows the ash fall, which direction the ash is going to fall. It has this little map with these shadows. Okay, this area is going to get ashfall today. So if you see that, you don't want to hang your laundry, and you don't want to wash your car. I hope it's okay today because I'm hanging laundry. Anyway, can you imagine, if you every morning had to check your weather to see whether you could hang your laundry, whether the ash was going to fall or not? Well, that's our normal down here. So, and oh, there's kids that actually people live on Sakurajima. Today there's like 4,000 people that live there, but back around 1900 there were like 23,000, I think, people living there. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, these kids that go to elementary school there, they wear helmets to and from school in case there's like little pebbles or rocks or have hard ash coming. There's a lot of the ash that comes from Sakurajima is actually like sand or little bits of rock. So like it's really bad for your car. You have to be careful if you get it on your car. You can't just wipe it or you've scratched your car. Anyway, this area, Sakurajima is really famous for tiny mikans and giant daikons because the soil underneath like this alluvial fan that comes down from the northern peak from all this erosion. Underneath the soil is all these jumbled up volcanic rocks, and that makes for really good drainage, and that makes for some good farmland. So they have their famous products from Sakurajima. Okay, if I haven't bored you enough with this volcano talk, I'm going to tell you one more story about the volcano. Because in 1914, it had a massive eruption. So in January 10th, 1914, the whole area was shaken by these earthquakes, 250 earthquakes, 4 really strong ones. And so the people that lived on the island, they thought, okay, this isn't a good sign. And plus the water in their wells started like getting really hot. And they're like, okay, time to leave. So they grabbed whatever boats they could and they got themselves and their farm animals across the bay, like about 4 kilometers or 4.5 kilometers from Sakurajima to Kagoshima City. I have swum that, which was kind of fun. But anyway, these people got on boats and they went across the bay and they found shelter in Kagoshima City. And then 2 days later, a fissure opened up halfway up the southwestern side and just this enormous eruption went up horizontally across the bay, and then it started spiraling upwards, and then the roar of that initial explosion was heard all the way to Shikoku and to the northern part of Kyushu. That was one big loud bang. And then it erupted on the other side of the volcano, and they were both swirling upwards, and they went about 8 kilometers in the atmosphere, and the smoke and ash was reaching all of Kyushu, all the way up to Tokyo, and even to the Ogasawara Islands, which are in English called the Bonin Islands. They're 1,000 kilometers southeast of Kyushu. And we know that ash from Sakurajima is there because geologists have been analyzing the soil there, and wow, here's this Sakurajima ash from 1914. Anyway, on that same day that all this volcanic thing is going on, a 7.1 magnitude earthquake occurs in Kagoshima, and it collapsed houses, it caused a tsunami, killed 35 people, and it broke the seismograph. So we've got this like apocalyptic scene with ash falling, noise. Like when a volcano erupts, it makes a big noise. So it's like really loud and the ash is falling and earthquakes are happening. So as you can guess, the people of Kagoshima City were also evacuated. So, but ash and pumice kept falling. Lava flowed for months and it buried fields and villages. It shallowed the bay. It covered nearby islands. And needless to say, people's livelihoods were shattered. The wind was blowing from the west, so houses on the other side from where Kagoshima City, the other side of the prefecture, it's another peninsula that goes down. It's called Osumi. The people over there all got covered in ash. Actually, the houses were buried up to the roofs in ash, and houses in Kagoshima City got covered in ash too. And they would, if they survived the earthquake, well, the weight of the ashfall collapsed the houses. Okay, so this all started in January, right? So by April, Sakurajima was no longer an island. You might say, oh, Sakurajima, that means Cherry Blossom Island, right? Well, yeah, it used to be an island. But now it's connected to the Osumi Peninsula because the lava flow connected it then. And it also engulfed islands and kind of grew. So it just continued erupting over the next year. But by November of the following year, it was quiet and the residents got money from the government and moved back and rebuilt their homes on Sakurajima. Imagine that. So if you ever come to Kagoshima, I recommend you visit Sakurajima and drive around the backside of the volcano past where it's connected to Osumi, and you're going to come across a torii gate. Now this torii gate had been 3 meters high, but right now if you look at it, it's not even 1 meter high because it's buried, and the earth, it's like 2 meters deep or under this short little torii gate now. And locals were going to dig that out when they were cleaning up after the eruption, but they thought, oh, well, we'll just leave it for posterity so people can see what it was like. And it's a pretty cool thing to see this short little torii gate there. And It's right next to this school. It's right next to an elementary school, or a junior high school anyway. It has an interesting name. I think it's called Kurokami. Yeah, Black God. Anyway, the whole area of Sakurajima and Kagoshima, the bay, everything sunk 60 centimeters, some even a meter. All the land sunk because the Ida caldera, all the lava was gone from it, so everything sunk. So today, you think, why in the world are you living in such a place with this volcano? And it's like, well, it's true that the amount of lava gathering in the Ida caldera is reaching its pre-1914 levels. This is true. And it does seem a little insane to live on an active volcano, but 4,000 people do. Some of my students lived there as kids, and they said it was really fun to go out with pots and pans on their heads when the volcano was erupting, so they could hear the ting, 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 ting of the rocks falling on their pots. But anyway, so today, don't worry. There are canals for channeling the ashy mudslides and the lava on Sakurajima. You can see them. They're pretty easy to see. You can probably even see them on Google Earth. And every January, there are evacuation drills for all the people that live on Sakurajima. There are concrete shelters all around the island that kind of look like concrete bus stop things, you know. Maybe they even are concrete bus stop things. But anyway, you can stand under these concrete things if there's some ash and rocks falling. And there's all this high-tech equipment. In fact, I think Sakurajima is the most monitored volcano in the world. It has scientists in Kagoshima and at Kyoto University Kyoto University has a very good volcanology department. And so they analyze the data and they announce warning levels. And so I guess it's relatively safe. I mean, people adapt and they get used to what's normal, you know, and that's kind of normal. That's my normal, living next to a volcano. And you know what's funny about it is, like, I'll see Sakurajima erupting and I'll be like, whoa, look at that. It's so amazing. Look at that ash cloud. And then the local people are just like, huh? I hope it doesn't blow our way or whatever, you know. I just go to sweep it up. I was like, I think people are so used to it, it doesn't strike them as magnificent as it does me. So anyway, shall I tell you one more Satsuma story, or do anybody have a question about, or anything? Oh gosh, there's just, anyone want to say anything about Sakurajima? Nope.
Oh, yes, I always wonder because, I have been here for quite a while in Japan, but I am not well versed in Japanese history or, other things. And so I wonder, where do you find all this information so that you can, tell a story, and it is a full-bodied story. So that
well, it depends on the topic.
Right?
For Sakurajima, I mean, I live here, so, just it's like, I don't know, I guess I just research it. There's a Sakurajima Visitor Center that has lots of information, but I guess I didn't really get much from there. I did a lot of research online, I think, and for my Japanese history, I've read this, actually I've read 3 times this Japanese language Japanese history book, because I needed to up my Japanese reading level. So that had a lot of information in it, and it mentions some fellow from history, and so I'm like, okay, it gives me just since it's 1 volume and it covers so many years, it's not very deep. So whenever anybody is mentioned, I'm like, okay, that's not enough information about this person. So I'd look online and I'd learn as much as I can about that person online, and then I'd continue reading my book until I get to the next person or the next event, and I'm like, okay, well, that's not enough information for me, and then I have to read it all, and then I'd go back and read some more. So it took me a long time to work my way through this book, doing my research like that, doing my studies like that. But I wouldn't be satisfied otherwise, because I have so many questions. Who is that, and why is he important, and what does even that mean, So that's kind of how I did it.
Well, I can imagine how it takes time, definitely. And when you do that, when you do your research, do you usually do the research in Japanese, or is it English?
Well, the thing is that there's some of the topics, the English is not only, there's not very much information in English, but a lot of it's just inaccurate. Shockingly wrong. Like when you read the Japanese and then you go to look at the English, like, whoa, there's a huge discrepancy here. So in that case, and if it's Japanese history, I'm generally going to go with the Japanese, because it just makes more sense. So I end up using a lot of Japanese, yes, especially for stories like that ninja guy, Hattori. The English stuff was just really useless. And the elephant story, that one
Right.
was Japanese too. That was because there was just not that story didn't exist in English that I could find.
Yeah, I think that it's really important, the point you made just now about, well, having the research in Japanese and English, because I believe that quite a few people who are, let's say, fortunate to be able to do research in Japanese, they have noticed those differences between the Japanese sources and the English sources that are available out there. And I believe that sometimes it's also very obvious to people like you that, yes, there is a lot of, probably, I wouldn't, maybe there are some mistakes, factual mistakes in the English sources, but also there is a good amount of misinterpretation as well.
Oh yeah, that's true. If somebody's looking at okay, like if somebody's looking at something from a Western point of view, without the background knowledge of Japanese culture, yeah, they're easy to make a mistake. Like, oh, I don't know if this is exactly to the point, but when I was writing the article about Hiraizumi and northern Fujiwara, when Yoshitsune, okay, it's kind of jumping here, Yoshitsune was Minamoto no Yoshitsune. He was this really classically a gallant character who's been, retold. His story's been retold in, kabuki and stories throughout the years. But he had helped his older brother, Minamoto no Yoritomo, who became the first Kamakura shogun. He helped him win the battle against the Taira, but Yoritomo was jealous of him and didn't trust him, which was, I just thought, doesn't even make sense. Come on, Yoritomo, get over it. But so he had his brother killed. But well, he was trying to have his brother killed. And so the armies, the soldiers were around his house, and his loyal Benkei was killed. It was a famous story. He was killed standing up because he was like such a tough guy. He was just filled with arrows, and he was still standing trying to fight. It was the standing death of Benkei. But anyway, so Benkei died, and then he and his wife and baby were in the house, and well, they committed ritual suicide. But how can the wife and child didn't commit ritual suicide? Yoshitsune killed them, and then he killed himself. But I was going to put that in the story, and then when my oldest son in the U.S., I often ask him to look at my stories, and he said, well, that's understandable from a Japanese viewpoint, but Westerners aren't going to go for that. That sounds pretty bad. So they just chose suicide rather than death is how I ended up putting it, because that's in effect what it was, but that's not exactly how it was carried out according to the story that I read, So that's just one thing, because the Japanese have this, because of the Buddhist thought, and life as reincarnation has always just been a given. It's just a given in Western and Eastern thought. Like, I was raised in Judeo-Christian background, and there's only one life, and then there's the afterlife, and that's that. But in Eastern thought, no, it's like a continuous circle of life. And so for them, for the olden days of samurai to die from seppuku, well, that was an honorable death. That would have good karma, and that would, allow them to go higher in their next life, or at least have, a more pleasant time in the future, in their future lives. So that was an honorable death. Whereas to a Western thought, my teaching, from my background, that's like a mortal sin. I was raised a Catholic, and yeah, so it's very different.
Yeah, it is indeed. And we often, I think that Tim can also talk about this a little bit, but we often make the mistake of trying to project our values and understanding onto something that is, that has a very different logic, and also very different traditions and values as well. So,
Oh, indeed. And that's what we even do it when we think about the past. We put our own values on past people. Like, how could they have done such a thing? How could those founding fathers have owned slaves? I mean, God, what were they thinking? But it was their normal,
And just imagine what future generations are going to say about us.
Oh, I think that all the time. I mean, when I was young, there were experiments, scientific experiments on animals were like always happening, and scientific experiments on humans. This was like the CIA giving unsuspecting people LSD. Like these things happen. But nowadays, oh my God, it's like never going to happen. In 1908, there was a pygmy in the New York Zoo. I mean, that's not going to happen today. It's like we've come a long way. Our what do you call it? Our morality is evolving, So yeah, so it's just the same, as we look at the Japanese or the Japanese past through our lens. Well, we're not going to necessarily see it correctly, Cultures you have to kind of understand the culture to understand the people and the language.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you for saying that. But it's such an important point that we think that we come here and we understand things as we see them, but it's really different most of the time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah. I also, yeah. I mean, I always ask questions of people. Like why is there salt? Why do people put this salt on the ground? Well, it's we always do that. It's just to purify it. But why? Well, I don't know. My mom did it, so that's why I do it. But why? So anyway, but I know why now. I read this book on Shinto by this Shinto priest, and he said that misogi, purification, is essential. It's like the basis of Shinto because Shinto is, a reverence and awe of nature, and purity and cleanliness and order. And so we have, you have the Shimenawas, which of course come from the story of Amaterasu in her cave, but from the Kojiki. But also those Shimenawas attract and hold on to evil. And sorry, so I got a little tripped off from the salt story. But so the whole deal of Shinto is being clean, and there is no sin. There's no like, what did I learn as a Catholic? You're born in sin kind of thing. There's no such concept in Shinto. You're like the kami is within you, so you're just an extension of the kami. So of course you're born pure, and when you do things wrong, it's like it's just a mistake. And to get rid of that mistake, you just have to be purified, and then you can be back to your more kami state. It's such a positive outlook, such a cheerful religion. Anyway, the salt thing is because the initial idea of purification was the best way to purify it was to be in the sea, and the salt water would purify you. But then that grew to using salt, and so they put these little cones of salt by the doors so that it will purify their house or business or whatever, and kind of like attract any evil away from people as they walk in to keep their store pure. And you'll see the sumo wrestlers, throwing salt in the ring before they do their match, because their match is like it's like kamigoto. It's a thing you do for it's like a thing you do for God, kind of like an offering to the kami, or like a performance for the kami, because they do it in a Shinto shrine. Anyway, that was about salt. Oh yeah, because I asked people why they use salt, and they didn't know. They didn't really have a good answer for me.
Yes, it is fascinating. I also remember it's a little bit different from the salt topic, but how when you're born into a certain environment or a certain culture, it's really difficult to question things and just to think, why is this, done in this way or in that way? And I noticed that, when I was home in Bulgaria, I really very seldom questioned the rites there, the customs there. It wasn't until I went to university, of course, and we studied folklore and a little bit of cultural traditions there. But the biggest learning or the steepest learning curve actually happened. What came to me when I came to Japan. So, yeah, it is fascinating to see how we actually learn to question things when we are when we live or we have to live in a different environment from the one we were born in.
I guess that's true.
I was just going to say, to the topic of being born pure versus original sin. I recall in college studying about that and the two different functions of a Shinto baptism versus for example, a Catholic baptism. The Catholic, as you mentioned, Diane, assumes original sin, and therefore the idea is to erase that that dark mark from our souls. While in Japan, they assume the baby's pure and they want to ward off the evil spirits from infecting the child. So just even the same, we assign the same word, baptism, but it doesn't have the same functions, at least in the minds of the people performing it. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Speaking of the stories that people don't know about, I'd like to tell you about Satsuma sweet potatoes, which is a real leap from Shinto. Well, no, there is a connection. Just wait for the end.
It's all connected.
If you want to hear that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so, since the Jomon era, which is like 14,000 BC until about 600 BC in southern Kyushu. Now, the Jomon era ended depending on when wet rice agriculture reached that area. So it's like you read in the book, it'll say okay, 300 BC is when the Jomon era ended, but it actually ended a lot earlier in Kyushu than it did in other areas because wet rice farming came first to Kyushu. Anyway, during the Jomon era, there was the people of Satsuma, which is the peninsula upon which I live. They were trading with the islanders, like the people in Amami Oshima, Kikaijima, little island beside Amami, all the way down to the Ryukyu island, which is now Okinawa. That island chain. They were trading with them, and then the Ryukyu would trade with China, and so there was like a pretty good. Well, I'm not in the Jomon era. I don't think the Ryukyu traded with China. Don't quote me on that. I don't know, but there was definitely a lively trade going on. But these people were all hunter gatherers. So, like, what do you trade? Well, they traded shells and things like that, and sea products or whatever. But anywho, this continued on, and so in the 1600s. Oh wait, I got to back up a minute. In the course of this trade, something important came to Kagoshima, and it was sweet potatoes. Spoiler. Sweet potatoes originally were cultivated in South America, in Central America, and by 1584, thanks to the European traders, they had made their way to the Yan province in China. And at this time, Ryukyu was definitely trading with China. They were a tributary of the Ming, so that means that they bring tribute to the Ming court, and then the Ming court magnanimously allows them to trade with them because the emperor of China was like the emperor of the world, right, in their own opinion. And so they would trade with the Ryukyu kingdom. Ryukyu became a kingdom in the mid-15th century when one king united the three separate little countries that were down there on the island of Okinawa. So Ryukyu was trading with China. And in the course of that trade, a sailor from Ryukyu brought back some sweet potatoes, and he grew them in his yard in Kadena, in what is now Okinawa. And then, 100 years later, we're talking 1605 here, a young lad, well, not really, a 22-year-old fisherman, farmer, sailor, from Ibuzuki, southern Kagoshima, southern Satsuma, he was named Maeda Liemon. He visited Ryukyu, and he saw these people eating these strange-looking bulbous roots. What were they? People told him, okay, these we got them from China. They're great. So he tried them. He thought, whoa, this is good. And so he brought some back and planted them in his little garden. And they took to the old volcanic soil here just great. So they grew really well, and he shared some with his neighbors. And he's still working his job, going back and forth to Ryukyu as a sailor. And 2 years later, his luck ran out because his ship was hit by a typhoon, capsized, and Maeda perished in the sea. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, back in Satsuma, sweet potatoes were doing fine, and people were sharing them, and the cultivation of sweet potatoes just grew and spread throughout Satsuma. And people didn't call them sweet potatoes; they called them kara imo, Chinese potatoes. Mm. And that name is still used for sweet potatoes in Kagoshima. They're not called satsumaimo, they're called karaimo. Karaimo, if you put it together. But, so the neighbors heard, oh my God, Maeda died. So they erected a gravestone for him, and they engraved it with the words, Karaimo don, Lord's sweet potato. Mm. And then, a few years later, a shrine was built for him. It's called the Toko Shrine. It's still standing in Ibuzuki. I have been there. And it's called the Karaimo Jinja, the sweet potato shrine. And Maeda is deified as a Shinto kami there. How about that? But that's not the end. In the 18th century, news of this plant reached the ears of the shogun, Tokugawa Yoshimune. And he heard how, in spite of famines that had been ravaging the country, there were like some serious famines in the Edo era, 3 to be precise, few people in Satsuma died. Like, why? So he assigned this master of Western science, Aoki Konyo, to cultivate sweet potatoes from Satsuma as a survival food. So he did, and as Yoshimune hoped, the Satsuma sweet potatoes, I call them Satsuma sweet potatoes, they proved to be useful against starvation, and they saved many lives through the centuries. And I have this friend named Chieko, who was born in 1919, so she had just been put into an arranged marriage when she was 21, I guess, and then right in 1940, the end of 1940, she got married. And anyway, so she went through the whole war and the rebuilding of Kagoshima from ashes after the war. And she told me that sweet potatoes are what kept her and her family alive during those years. They ate them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so they were very thankful for those sweet potatoes. It's funny, when she told me about her years in the war, she'd always punctuate it with, "But my life wasn't hard." Ha! What an attitude. Anyway, can you imagine being this guy Maeda and bringing back these plants from Ryukyu and pounding them in your garden, only to wake up in the afterlife and discover that you've been made a god? How awesome is that?
Absolutely, yes.
So anyway, if you have to look hard to find that actually his grave is down in Kagoshima, but I had this local guy help me find his grave because it was like really hard to find. But his grave is still there. People still take care of it, put flowers in front of it, and there's still the Toko Shrine is easy to find, and you can go and pay your respects to old Maeda there. You never know what your little act is going to end up doing, huh? He saved the country from famines. Good for him.
Good for him, yes. And good for the country too, that they got him, to be their man.
Yeah.
But that's, oh, sorry, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say that that's a fascinating story, and it's just as you say, you never know what happens, and even a small act of, let's say, curiosity can help so many people in the long run. Of course, I'm sure that he never imagined that, yeah.
I'm fascinated because I lived in Hawaii for 14 years, and I actually lived through 2 lava flows. The first was in 2014, and it ended up petering out, but it got within about 3 kilometers of my house, and they had these projected flow paths, mapped out based on what they called the points of steepest descent. So it's kind of a rough guesstimate. My house was in that projected lava flow.
Wow.
And I thought that our house might get, overcome with lava. Anyway, it didn't. But it was fascinating to see how living in a volcanic geographical area is woven into the local culture and how people look at it. And to me, what was most fascinating about it was observing, as kind of an armchair anthropologist, the reaction to this impending lava flow based on the non-Hawaiians who moved there from the mainland, like me, and the local Hawaiians, and how they were viewing it, right? And so they would have these open meetings, and you would have these open arguments, actually, differences of opinion, where the mostly the Americans from the mainland are saying, let's get some D9 bulldozers and alter the path of the lava flow.
Ha ha ha! Interesting.
Yeah, and one guy even said, it's overflowing from this crater, so if we send a missile and bomb the crater, we can make it flow in the opposite direction. And it was this pitting, man against nature, using technology to find solutions, while the native Hawaiians were saying, no, like, we have no right to do that. Pele is our goddess, and she allowed us to live on this land, and so she has a right to take it away, and we shouldn't mess with the volcano. And this was a big point of contention, but I realized just how deeply embedded it was. And the point I'm making in relation to Japan is, I have thought for a long time that the native Hawaiian religion and Japanese Shinto have a lot in common. Animism, nature worship, female deity who's revered in these religious traditions. And it makes sense that right now, or last I heard, over 500,000 Japanese were studying hula. And when they come to Hawaii, they are very reverential toward the hula tradition. And I'm talking kahiko, which is the worship tradition, not the made for tourists hula tradition, which is different, right? And the local kumus loved the Japanese students because they were very earnest, and they could relate. It resonated with them, the idea of going up the mountain, picking a flower that you're going to make your lei with, thanking the flower, for sacrificing itself for this beautiful lei. Like, it came very naturally to them. So it's really interesting to see how volcanic culture has affected the Kagoshima tradition. So thank you for covering that.
So we've got Yuka this morning as well. Yuka, hello, thank you for
Hi,
joining
everyone.
us.
Huh?
Oh,
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Diane. Thank you for a fascinating, story that you have sort of given us. So first off, I'm reading some of your blogs in Medium. They're all interesting titles. I'm like, especially forest bathing, the Japanese practice of Shinrin Ryoku, and it's like, and I will never, come up with this topic.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, because to me it's like because you can tell by my accent. I'm a native Japanese. By the way, before I'm going into any further with this line of questioning, I think I might have missed the very beginning of your talk today. Could you go back and give me why you ended up in Japan and Kagoshima Sakurajima of all places?
Well, I was living in the Philippines doing
Okay,
volunteer work, and I was a teacher.
okay.
And in 1987, Marcos was kind of toppled, and Aquino, he had been opposed by this guy Benigno Aquino, but Benigno Aquino got shot at the airport, and that wasn't great. But then his wife gained massive popularity, and she became the next president. And there was it was like a bomb went off in the main shopping area, and a guy had his throat cut. We discovered outside our house one morning, this guy laying there with his throat cut. So it was not the safest place to be with my two kids. And a friend of mine who lived there, she needed to move to Tokyo, but she was very unhealthy. Well, not unhealthy. She was just sick. She was had morning sickness that was like really severe, and she needed help to move. And because her husband was in Europe, and so I said, okay, I'll help you move to Tokyo. And so I helped her and her kids, and I had my two kids and my husband. We all went with her together because we were like really good friends, and helped her move to Tokyo. And then here I am. And the reason I'm in Kagoshima is because I was living in Fukuoka in 1993, 4. And I took a trip down here. My family took a little trip down here, and we were like, whoa, what a beautiful city. It was so beautiful. And people said, oh, no, don't move to Kagoshima. People carry umbrellas to keep the ash off. And I'm like, ha, 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 that can't be possible. Of course not. I didn't see any ash when I was there. Ha, ha. So stupid. And they do carry umbrellas to keep the ash off, by the way. Anyway, so we moved down here in like the end of 1995, I think it was. And been here ever since. Oh, I mean, yeah. Here I am with my two youngest kids, anyway.
Okay,
And my
thank you.
older kids moved to the U.S. like as they became adults.
I'm sorry, if my question has brought you painful memories about Philippines. I apologize.
Oh no, it's fine. That was a long time ago. But I mean, I hope I didn't freak anybody out with these stories. But no, it's just life, Life has its ups and downs.
Yeah. So, and I have another question, which is the title of this room today is Educational Adventures. So, and then, so how, so what is education to you though? Is it because of living in Japan is a sort of educational adventures, or because you said you were or you are an English teacher? It's just educational term in this room title. Does this, is just because of that, or could you sort of why this title of the room? I'm just wondering.
To ask Maya. Maya
Okay.
chose it. Tell us, Maya.
I think the intention behind it was that Diane gives these educational tours, and so she brings you to these places and tells you the story to give you a sense of place and the history and the context.
Yeah, more than an English teacher, I'm a tour leader.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's yes. Actually, Diane came up with obviously with a better title for the room. Yes.
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
No,
I agree with you,
this is a
Diane.
great title. Yeah. I always, I'm always get lost. So it's me. I'm just, and I was dying to know about that. So yeah, thank you. No, this is a great title. You always come up with a great title, Maya.
No, thank you very much for that. But please don't feel obliged, to to say anything about that, because I understand that there is some, people can have different expectations when it comes to the title. But as Tim said, yes, my intention or the understanding behind the title was that Diane is always she gives talks, and she actually educates people. But before she does that, she learns a lot. By herself. She reads books and she does research. And so that's something, that is a whole adventure, because when you do the research in Japanese and you're not a native speaker of Japanese, it really feels like something that takes time and a lot of effort. It's an adventure. And that's why I came up with this title. So apologies to everybody who thought that we were going to talk about the education in Japan. So no, this was not the
I thought I'm sorry, I took things literally, but I think I agree with you, because when you do some research, even like me as a Japanese, and I realize I know very little about history of my own country, but when I go back to the history, and it's kind of exciting to learn why people did what, and then probably they had a good reason to do those things.
Sure they did. Everybody's
Yeah.
just doing the best they can with what they know at the time.
Right. So Diane, so where is the most popular, or what is the most popular topic when you are, leading those tours, if I can ask?
Goodness gracious, it's just so broad.
Okay.
I think the old roads and the Edo era is pretty interesting for people. The whole Sankin Kotai, how the lords had to live 1 year in Edo and then 1 year in their own domain, and then the road system was set up to expedite their travels, and basically their wives and children were held hostage in Edo, although it wasn't called that. And checkpoints were set up so no women could leave and no guns would make it into Edo. And women would meet, if they traveled in disguise, they had a little room where an old woman would go and strip the person to make sure they were really a man, There's a lot of interesting things going on in the Edo era. So I think that's a pretty popular topic.
Actually, I didn't know about Sankin Kotai, but I didn't know that women has to has to disguise. Huh.
Well, they didn't have to. If they did, they were going to get in trouble. Women had to have papers that, like, everybody had to have travel permits if they wanted to travel during that era. But women had to have not only a travel permit, they had to have an explanation of where they were going and why they were going there. Now, the whole idea was not like we're putting down women. It was that they didn't want, they didn't want any women to leave Edo. Because why? If the women were going to leave Edo, then maybe the Lord was going to stage a coup or had some plan up his sleeve. Then he was trying to get his wife and concubines out so it would be safe for them, So that was why. That was the whole idea behind that for the women. It's funny, though, because if you think about the lords raising their families in Edo, like, for example, I'm in Satsuma, right? The Shimazu clan of Satsuma, they had their estate in Edo, and so when the Lord finally came of age and his father died or whatever, and he inherited his domain, he'd go back, he'd come down to Satsuma with his Edo accent, and Satsuma had its own language back then, and it was like, what is this guy even talking about? Very difficult communication issues they would come up with, and they were just cultured to the Edo culture, and they weren't really that tuned into on the own reality of their domain. So that was kind of an interesting situation that happened during Edo with the seclusion of these children all in Edo. But it also made for alliances because they had friendships with other domain kids, other lords' kids. I don't know. There's a lot to talk about in that era.
Maybe we can have a special room for Edo period. I'll come.
I will. Oh, I will too, definitely, because every period in the Japanese history is fascinating. But I think that there is some nostalgia when it comes to the Edo period, especially with here in Tokyo, there are quite a few places I think that have been designed to resemble, let's say, the atmosphere of that period, and people in Japan are really very fond of it. And I wonder why it is, because, as I mentioned, I'm not really well versed in Japanese history, but there must be something there.
Well, there's still shops in Tokyo that have roots, in the Edo era. Like there's this Katsuobushi store right in Nihonbashi. It's been there for generations and generations and generations, since 1605 or something, really old. So there are here and there little shops like that. Another period of Japanese history that's interesting is it's like the Kofun and then the Yamato, when it was before Shotoku Chaishi, who was the regent in the 6th, 7th century, around there. He was those two. He was born at the end of one, Anyway, he was the regent under his aunt, who was Empress Suiko, and he was the guy that started uniting the country. He was so brilliant. He was a real Confucius because Confucianism and Chinese thought were considered the intellectual thought of Japan for hundreds of years. So clearly until Edo and Meiji, even the founders of the Meiji, the Satsuma, Saigo Takamori and Okubo, these guys were all raised in Confucian thought. But anyway, he pulled together. He wrote the first constitution, and it wasn't like a constitution of laws or anything. It was all these Confucian values. Rulers should be benign. They should work for the good of the people. They should not seek personal gain. All these really awesome values that he pulled together. Until that time, Japan was a tributary of China, so Japan would go, and they were a poor country, so they would bring slaves to the Emperor of China. And then the Emperor of China would give them, allow them to trade, and they'd bring back, mirrors and metal items and pottery and stuff like that. But during his time is when Japan started pulling together, and then from his reforms came the Taika reforms in 645, and then came the Ritsuryo system in 703, and that all pulled Japan together as a united country, and set up provinces, and set up capitals in each province, and then temples and nunneries, and 7-story pagodas. And governmental offices. Those governmental offices were manned with aristocrats from the Nara area, but the local offices were all local people. I think those local people probably resented the aristocrats, but anyway, he organized the country, and that's when Japan started calling itself Nihon instead of Yamato or Wa, and that's when we first started calling the emperor instead of Okimi, and that was the beginning of the Japanese state. Okay, that whole time is amazing. Because then the Japanese state decided that they were the equals to the Chinese, and their barbarians, the Ainu, in northern Honshu in Hokkaido, the Hayato in southern Kyushu, and the Amami-Oshima people. All these guys were the outside barbarians that had to bring tribute to them in Nara. That was kind of interesting.
Diane, I feel bad that you're giving us all these free lessons about Japanese history, and really, thank you for that. But I have a quick question. Why the term or country's name Nihon was chosen? Do you have...
The land of the rising sun. Because before that, it was a different character. The Wa or was it? I can see it in my head, but I don't know how to read it. This is my problem with Japanese. So it was a different name. So they weren't going to be barbarians anymore. They were going to be equal. In fact, Shotoku Taishi wrote to the Emperor of China, the Emperor of the Sui dynasty. The Emperor of Sui dynasty wrote to Japan and said, the Emperor of the land, of the land of the sun writes to the land, humbly inquires of how you're doing, kind of thing. And he wrote back and said, the Emperor of the land of the rising sun writes to the Emperor of the land of the setting sun. So Shotoku Taishi said, I'm the land of the rising sun. You're the land of the setting sun. Get that? Get that? See that? We're rising, you're setting. Yeah, the Chinese emperor didn't like that so much, but it showed Japan was really coming up, and it wasn't he that changed the name, though. It was the Tenmu. Somebody around 700 changed the name. I'm forgetting the name right now. But yeah,
that is actually very interesting. It's almost it's kind of opposite these days, but
anyway. It is.
It's kind of ironical. But anyway, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Yuka and Diane. So it's 3 minutes past 9 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
No, please don't be, because I want to continue this discussion another time, and I hope that you are up for it. Because today it's Wednesday, it's a working day here in Japan, and people are getting ready for work. Probably some of them are already getting, to their offices. So we just need to say goodbye to everybody. But Diane, let's continue.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks so much for your patience and listening to me.
No, please come back. We can't get enough of this.
Absolutely, yes, please do. So
I second the sentiment. Yes.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. And then. Okay, yes, there is Frank actually commented, in the room chat. So, great discussion. Thanks, Diane. Next year's NHK Taiga drama is on Tokugawa Ieyasu, so very timely to do a room on the Tokugawa Jidai.
Yes.
Yoo-hoo! So, this is a great idea. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. And definitely we can think about it, and we will. So, to everybody who stayed with us on Wednesday morning, have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the week. And we're looking forward to having you here once again next week on Wednesday. And of course, next time when Diane joins us again as a speaker. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in today. We will be on air next week on Wednesday at 8 a.m. Japan time again. So join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Again, we are looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you!